Welcome back to Confluently. What does it mean to lead with legacy in mind and still, I don't know, stay radically open to change? Diana Wu David is a global leader, a strategist, an author of The Future Proof, and the founder of Future Proof Labs. Her work isn't just about preparing for the future, it's really about designing it. It's in this conversation, we're going to go deep at what reinvention looks like when it's not optional, the lessons learned from loss, and how it builds careers and lives that stand the test of the accelerating future. Diana, welcome to Confluently. I've been looking forward to this conversation because you really write and lead from the edge of change. And I think that the people that are listening right now really feel that they're standing at that edge too.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start at the beginning a little bit. What early messages kind of shaped how you viewed success and ambition?
Wow, going all the way back. Okay.
I'm going all the way back. Like let's start about the spark.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the things that we talk about in futures is the past. And one of the things I love about some of the foresight frameworks is you talk about people's pasts so that you understand that people have all had these different experiences that are feeding in. So I grew up in Arizona, and what was the spark? I think, we got a lot of latitude. I rode horses. I was in the rodeo parade. We did barrel racing. I think about my kids now, and I think about my childhood where my parents were like, yeah, go, barrel race on the top of a horse. And potentially, at one point, I remember my leg getting smashed into the fence, and, that was cool. It was just growing up. And so I think that sense of possibility, I also grew up in that crazy state where it really was the frontier. And I think that there is a sort of frontier spirit there, where anything is possible. And for sure, my parents were very much, go off and do whatever you think is extraordinary and interesting. Um, but just remember that it's the people that matter.
Absolutely love that. And, like you, I grew up in the generation of, just be home by the time the streetlights are on. We didn't have cell phones or anything to like track us. So, we got up to God knows what. Um, and yeah, I think that some of that adventure comes from a little bit of danger, right? I think of the Nordic version of raising children, which is, allow them to do dangerous things, safely, right? And so
Yeah.
I try to perpetuate that, but it does give you a sense of freedom and boundaries. So, my next question is really about, was there a moment in your life or your career where you realized, you know what, this can't be all there is? I really want to design it differently.
I feel like I have that every couple of years. So maybe that's what my motivating force is. I really think that I imagine that people now at all levels, but particularly younger, feel that because they haven't even necessarily been trained in the idea of paying your dues. So I was always super impatient. And I remember, my first job going to work for Henry Kissinger, and I was 20 years old, 21, and thinking, I just don't understand why he does not want my foreign policy advice. So, really feeling, impatient, and after a couple of years feeling like, well, I've kind of done all that I've come here to do as an assistant. And I really need to keep growing. And so I think now in retrospect, having delved into more of my motivation so that I can prioritize what I want to work on more, I think that learning and growth has always been our core value. And so the minute that things start to slow down, it's actually been a discipline over time for me to say, no, I have to stay because there are deeper things to learn here. I can't just, go on to the next thing because I'm bored, and kind of understanding when is it boredom and um, when is it something where I've really topped out and there really isn't as much for me to learn and also contribute. So I have to somehow reframe it or move on or find new ways to keep myself motivated and learning.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more. I am very much the person that does not like to stand in line, anywhere. So, and I wouldn't say I necessarily get bored easily, but I understand where you're like, am I still continuing to learn, grow, and stretch? Or is this a situation where I need to, dig deeper into a little bit more? I'm going to actually circle back into the question of why, right? Or finding your why. But one of the unique things about you and I admire so much is really that you have lived and worked globally. How has your cultural as well as geographic journey really kind of shaped your leadership style that you have today?
That's epigenetic, I think. I was born to parents who had spent time actually in Japan and Turkey during the Vietnam War. My father was drafted and sent to those two places, which I guess was lucky for him. And my parents had just gotten married, so they had those stories when we were growing up. Like we had these artifacts in our home of, times when they were there and the sort of donkey bell or something from this time they were in the mountains. So it all sounded really like romantic and fabulous. And I think it was for them that this beautiful time in their lives, of course, right before they had kids, so they had to settle down. But prior to that, my grandfather came from Denmark to the US, but he also went with his wife and two elder children before my mom was born to China, and they were in Shanghai in the 30s. And so, yeah, like I have this history of um, nomads, I guess, people who are willing to go. My grandfather had a fish business with his brothers, and so he spent time in China. He had business partner in Japan, and so I just always assumed that I would have a global life. And when it didn't pan out that way, in fact, after business school, I remember joining a firm thinking it was like joining the Marines. I was consulting and I was going to travel the world and do all this interesting work. And right before I joined, they said, actually, we've kind of refocused the practice. We've divided it. So you're going to be covering Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and where else did I work? Basking Ridge, New Jersey. And, I was thinking like Paris, and I would even go to, Afghanistan. I would go anywhere, but
Yeah.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania was not on that list, although it turns out it's a lovely place. So after a couple of years, I actually did decide I needed to go live abroad again. And really it just feeds me to be in different places and, challenging my assumptions always. So last week, quick story, I was at Petronas, facilitating for their board on a lot of their nominee boards at their top companies. Petronas is an oil and gas company, and it is a huge part of the GDP of Malaysia. And so everything there was different. Everything about the way they ran the meeting, opening with prayer, like the whole learning center being a very different outlay and context. Just it was so interesting, and it just enriched my sense of what's possible. That there are many different ways to do things and many different opportunities um, around what's possible and what success is.
Absolutely. I really like that story. And I would actually like to dig in a little bit more. What are some more interesting models of leadership that you've seen as you've done the consulting, globally that really kind of stuck with you? I guess fun stories.
Yeah, certainly my experience of being in Hong Kong, but having people from Australia to India, um, I would say that I don't know if it's a leadership model, but it's a different context. So relationships matter, of course, more than anything. And that was a big shift for me coming here. And um, it's got the relationship aspect, but then there's the regulatory aspect. So, for instance, if you're a leader and you have somebody in Japan, um, and you have somebody in India and somebody in Australia, like all of those people have completely different contexts. So, if you different power distances. So, for instance, if you're leading a meeting and you're the chair or you're the most senior person there in Malaysia, the power distance is so high. Whatever you say as a super direct American, you know, everybody will say, that sounds very smart, David, great. They will not contradict you. Whereas if you go to Australia or the US and you are the most senior person there and say, I think we should go into China, you'll have 8 people around the table thinking, saying, I don't know, that sounds like a terrible idea. And that's allowed. And so, flexing, I think what I've learned is that different models and different ways of leading really depend on the people in the room. And then, of course, you have people in teams that are from all over. And that requires you to not only flex your leadership style, but um, kind of lift them up in terms of, you don't want somebody who says, oh my gosh, I just had the most fabulous vacation in Hawaii, and you're on your team call with somebody who is in the Philippines and maybe a similar executive, but earning far less and doesn't have those opportunities. So it's that sort of understanding their cultural context, the differences between, the reality on the ground, and then helping them also work together across those things. I think it is, it's just really interesting, and I never assume anything anymore. I'm sure I do, but I don't know what I don't know. I assume a lot less than I did when I started out in my corporate job.
Absolutely. So I find that there's two parts to it. One is the beauty of understanding the culture, and then the second part is efficiency. So when you understand the cultural background, not only of your colleagues but also your clients and your customers, that you also, that really makes a difference in how not only you're perceived but also the reaction that you get. Right. So there's efficiency there at the end of the
Yeah,
day.
yeah, joy and efficiency. Yeah, there is a lot of difference, and I think that one of the things that my one of my bosses told me is because I do feel like I want to understand other cultures and I want to understand how we can come together and kind of do that. And he said the other thing that you need to remember, Diana, is that everybody expects you to be an American, and so you're never going to out Japanese the Japanese. Like, just understand that you're also just who you are. And that was helpful because I think I could, be quite accommodating and I could go the other direction. I like to think I'm not like the brash American coming in. Um, but sometimes, it was just clear, like the expectations were, and I have lived in Asia for 25 years. Last week I walked into Malaysia and they were like, well, that's because you're American. And I was like, I'm probably am, but like I think it's so funny that everybody just assumes a certain mindset and persona, and I just think that it's um, it's on us to be able to flex. It's not just where you go. And I have another fabulous story which really challenged my assumptions. So I was working with the board of the Asia Development Bank. And this is a nominee board, right? Countries elect or appoint people. So you have people from every single country, right? Their ethnic diversity is huge. The gender diversity was, one that many boards could only hope to aspire to. And so you think, wow, these people must be really different. And then we did some exercises, this intercultural conflict survey about how you express yourself, indirect or direct, and also how emotional you are, like expressively emotion, etc. And all of the people in that room, the most diverse, on paper room that I had ever been in, they all were in the exact same quadrant. It's like 2 by 2 quadrant. It was the very direct communication, emotionally unexpressive. And it was fascinating because all the management was it was based in Manila, that a lot of the management was more expressive and indirect. And so this sort of unearthed this conflict of communication because all of these people had grown up in different countries and different backgrounds, but they all were in this like finance minister track, right? Like, or regulatory track. So they had been conditioned over time to be very, very similar in terms of their thought patterns. And that was just fascinating to me because I was like, oh, yeah, this was useful. It
This
was
makes sense now.
eye-opening for
Yeah.
them too. Yeah. Oh, the reason that you feel like management is not, giving it to you in a very transparent way is all of you guys are ready for the bullet point report. And all of them are thinking, I've just like, had this coffee with you where I kind of told you what was going on if you had picked up the signals, and I was really passionate about it, but you didn't get a
Yeah.
report with bullet points, so you didn't know that you had been told. So, uh,
That is the most important part. And that's kind of where you're building bridges, I think, between those different communication styles. For me, one of the things that really struck me and, future proof is, the idea that reinvention isn't really optional anymore. It's really
yeah.
kind of an obligation of not only, people, but then also organizations and hopefully society over time. And so looking at some of those stories that you were just talking about, what does that look like in practice for you? And, again, with the people that you work with and the organizations, and kind of what are some little tidbits that, can be applied for people that are listening to the podcast?
So one of the reasons I did the book Future Proof: Reinventing Work in an Age of Acceleration was I started when I worked at Financial Times, a board director program, and all these people were super successful CEOs, law partners, et cetera, and they were all thinking about their next steps. What's next? And so they kept saying, Diana, what should I do? And I was thinking, like, why are you asking me? But but at the same time, also thinking about it for myself, really thinking about, okay, I've got 3 kids, I'm an exec, like where, I'm going to live longer. What does my life look like? How can I keep growing? And so I just started interviewing people that had done interesting reinventions, or maybe even were in the process of a side quest or something that I found. It just like I picked people who looked like they knew more than me about that particular topic. And some of them were in the middle. It's been really interesting. So that interviews were 2017, 2018. The book came out in 2019. And now to see sort of 5, 6 years later where people are has been very interesting. So one of the people I interviewed was Brian Tang, and he was the chief operating officer at a huge bank here. And he said, I had done 8 of the last 10 top IPOs in Hong Kong, and I just felt like the next 10 years could be doing that again and again and again. So he decided to leave this super cushy job and decided to start the Asia Capital Markets Institute, which was, he saw that there was a need and, being led by that need to have more conversations across the sector about changes in the regulatory environment. So that was a passion for him. He was a lawyer. um, and then he also spent a lot of time on technology, and he had small kids. So he was like, okay, one of the things I want out of my life, not just my work, is to make meaningful contribution to capital markets regulation and to spend some time with my kids. And I love technology. So he started this thing for kids. And in fact, took one of the school groups here to Google, and they won like globally the prize for being smart, innovative kids, whatever it was that they did. And so he was doing this 2 track, like, and, of course, everybody was like, why did you leave that really important job? And when I wrote the book, he said, I feel so uncomfortable that you had put me in my book or because he said, like, I'm in this messy middle. I don't know where this is going. I don't feel like I've been, I'm successful. I said, but you're just doing something interesting. You're like experimenting. So one of the things that I talk about as I interviewed all these people is, what do you do that is going to put you in a good position. One of them is experimenting, finding small ways to kind of stretch yourself and do different things that you care about. Doesn't have to be burn the boats on the beach and like go find a completely new thing, but always be experimenting. And then also it was kind of looking for adjacencies. So for him, he's starting this Asia Capital Markets Institute. He was a lawyer in Silicon Valley, hence the tech stuff. And then a couple years after the book, he became the director at Hong Kong U for the Legal and Innovation Technology and Entrepreneurship Center um, at the law school. And it was one of those things where, you start to follow your passions and learn and grow and kind of get out ahead of business as usual. And suddenly down the road, you're finding, wow, I'm really the only person that can do that. He's across legal tech, reg tech, entrepreneurship. And it's just been fascinating. And I have seen that time and time again, where people who have taken the time to think about other things that they can do in the future are much more ready and fluid and able to be playful as they approach the future and what's possible.
Why do you do what you do? And it's been phrased a lot of different ways, but this one really kind of struck me. What is your purpose? What is your driving motivation? What is your gift to others? All of these different types of way of proposing the same question that you start thinking about specifically in the middle, right? You start thinking about it in the middle, and it becomes more pressing as you get further on in your career and as your person and stuff like that. And you think about the legacy that you're going to lead, and what really matters at the end of the day. And I've asked this question of my friends and my colleagues and everything else like that, about what drives them, and the answers that I get back are really incredible and amazing, and how they're setting up to go ahead and pursue that through their lives. Even because this is reality, this is the real world. It's messy. You got to have a job that keeps the bills, pays the lights, stuff like that. So you're
Yep.
not always doing the why, right? But having that in focus so that you can go ahead and merge into it when you're ready financially, or incredibly, or as a person, or with the skill set. How did you find your why?
Well, I really feel like it changes. So we actually, after I wrote the book, people said, this is so great. You have all these exercises for us. Can we get together and do this? So I said, sure, let's get on a Zoom. And it became a thing. And every twice a year, I get together with a new cohort and we go through this process. And the first is orienting to the future, but the foundation is the values and why. And I think that in order to have that fluidity, that playfulness, some of it requires a grounding to know what doesn't change, what you come
Yes.
back to.
Yes.
And so that was, for me, a great process. When I left Financial Times full-time role, I did that process and I found it helpful. And it was really understanding what drives me. So, learning and growth. Community is a huge touchstone value for me. Orienting towards the future. So those things, I know if any of those things are in a project or whatnot, a job, then I will be happy at some level. But then the why part, really through even our future-proof community, one of the guys came and said, okay, I've just been doing this work on why with a group that follows, Simon Sinek, and he does it for companies and he does it for people. And that was also illuminating. It gives you some language around why. And for me, it made me realize that finding better ways to do things, which can be super annoying for anybody who works with me. I'm like, oh, we could just change that one little thing. um,
You're that
but
person? Are
it's
you that person? No.
I'm 100% the person who wants to always change it. Like even I do my keynotes and it's like, oh, I submitted my slides, but I want to just change this one thing. I am that person, and in when it's used for good, then it can be, for example, finding better ways to work. So, as I connect the dots backwards, I think about my nerdy college self just wanting to be, people would say, "What do you want to do after school?" And I'd be like, "I just think it would be cool to be a manager." It's like the lamest Dilbert-esque answer ever. Um, Neither of my parents were in business, so it just seemed cool. And
I love it.
and and it is truly like of my work when I look back, it has always been like unlocking the potential of people in my team, of course, for business results, smashing our targets, new breakthrough results, but truly finding better ways to work now as I've been on my own and being a, coach and consultant to C-level executives and companies. It does come back to that. I do believe that the way that we work is changing and that we spend a lot of time there, and it is dignifying. It is important. It's important for people to find out how it works best for them, and it's important for society and companies to have conversations about what that could look like, especially now. So maybe, 30 years ago, it looked different. I just wanted to be a manager, and then I did become a manager. Um, and now I feel like, because the environment has changed, I do think that work is changing so much. I've leaned into, okay, what does this look like? Maybe not, the one-to-one conversation I used to have with a teammate or other peers. And maybe it's more about like, what is the bigger picture and how do we affect change on that level? Because that's what's needed now.
Absolutely. I'm just going to throw out a random question that just came to mind as you were speaking, which is, we see the younger generations coming up, and they have a very different perspective of the world than we had growing up, right? What our parents taught us and what was possible was a little bit different than I think what's possible and what the world is telling the younger generation. And so we have seen it, I think, in the workplace where there's been this divide, right? Between, there's for lack of better terms, the boomers, the Gen Xers, which nobody remembers. And you've worked in these workspaces where there are generational divides. Which I think is not generational. It's about what we were told were possible, right? That viewpoint, that like how things should work. Like you said earlier in the conversation, you were like, I came in and you were like, Kissinger, why don't you want my views on the global policy? Because we were taught that, what is it, like, we are equal, what we say matters, and we bought into that lock, stock, and barrel, and then life came and smacked us in the face, and now we're Gen
Yeah.
X, where we're just like, eh. But looking at the younger, they're like, no, that's not acceptable and it's not okay. And so, thinking about that, how is that going to change the future of leadership? How do you see this, I guess, for a lack of a better term, disruption?
It's a great question because I did a talk on AI and human potential at a TEDx talk for the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And all engineers in the room, you'd think that those guys would be, on top of it. They know all of the stuff in terms of technology that most people walking the street don't even really know or can't get deep into. And I had an intern, and he said that he's really worried. He's in college. I think he's going into his senior year. He's really worried he won't get a job. And that really surprised me. So I tend to think that um, there are opportunities, and being a more entrepreneurial person is helpful because you do kind of go, okay, like, what's the angle here? So, um, when I think about my kids who all want to do completely different things, those things may not exist. But if they can have that expectation, I think what's dangerous is the promise made to me is if I went to school and studied hard and got good grades and then went to a good school and then I got a good job, that I'd be safe.
Yeah.
That was the social contract. And
Yeah.
it's not even a social contract for me now. Like it's, and for most of my peers, they're really not ready to hustle. They're not ready to move laterally. They're not ready to even figure out what 50 to 70 looks like because when I published my book, all these HR people were like, "Oh, that's the thing that nobody's talking about." people over 50 who are going to have to work till they're 70, and none of our companies are set up for that. We're not, and I would say like a lot, there's been a lot of talk about multi-generational cultures, and my MBA students, wow, I brought that up once, just like, hey, let's have a, random topic for 15 minutes and talk about multi-generational, and it was like the third rail. Like their faces were like, yes, we need to talk about this. It was amazing. And they're all in their
Was it the
30s,
talk
and
about when are they going to die? Um,
it was close. It was close. But I had not fully realized. I mean, I was looking at it from my perspective, which is, like how do you keep older people in the workforce and maybe make sure that people can also move up. But they were saying like, I'm terrified that if, there's a guy who's my peer who's 20 years older than me and he keeps walking over to give me advice. And I am worried that people will think that I'm not competent because of this dynamic. And another person saying, like, I feel, and particularly Asian cultures, right, respect your elders is a key um, value. And so they'll say, oh, like we're in the digital media and we work with some of the camera guys and they always have a lot of advice. But actually, like we've moved on. We're like, sort of seven operating systems ahead. And I need to respect my elders, but I'm also trying to balance the fact that things are moving so fast that I need to prioritize working with whoever is the most advanced in the technology. For there's somebody who is working in a TV station. And so I was surprised, right, that it was so um, it just the intensity of the emotion that came up for people was interesting. And I think it's just the beginning. We're really going to have to figure out how to work differently because, when I started out, it was like, wear a skirt, show up at this time. Like there were rules. There was a box, and you got into the box, and you're along for the ride, and you didn't dare say, "Why can't it be a circle?" And now, I think it's a great thing because you have a lot of people who are saying, "Why does it have to be that way? Why can't it be different?" And it is between technology and that, it is going to be different. We just haven't quite figured out like the processes in companies for all those voices to be heard and for that to actually create a really fabulous outcome. So I think futures methodologies actually is part of that,
hmm.
and futures thinking. It brings people together to co-create a future, but that not that many people are doing it.
What you said really resonates with me. So I come from a different generation. My grandparents were extraordinarily influential in my life and growing up and stuff like that. And they come from the Great Depression and the stock market crash and World War II and all of these type of histories and kind of the things that they taught me. Some of them work, some of them didn't, in current society. But I find that people that I talk to that are older and wiser than me, may have some funny thoughts that may not apply anymore. However, I find in general, their wisdom really comes down, for lack of better terms, when shit hits the fan, right? Because they've survived it. They've survived wars. They've survived depressions. They've survived, economic upheavals, recessions, stagnation, all of these things that, for us are fears. We've survived pandemics, survived things that we don't even really talk about in these days. And so I find that finding that bridge between the wisdom that is useful that can be applied. Somebody has lived through this previously, and they may have some good words of advice on how to do it, especially on Confluently, which was built originally on the concept around resilience, really is about a lot more. And I feel like you really specifically, within your book and your teachings and everything that you're doing, really offer a more grounded version of what that exactly means. So, with that, what does resilience mean to you? And what does it not? And where do we get it all wrong?
Hmm. Well, resilience is hard, and it just means that you get back up. It's like literally to me on some days it's I gotta get out of bed today. That sucks. But here we go. So, for me, curiosity has led me to be resilient. It sort of eventually allows me to get out of times when I don't feel so resilient. Um, and I think that there's a sense of perfection that we have now that we didn't. And it goes back to your question about growing up, where, even me, I say that I think everybody should be able to fall down, but do I really allow, particularly my kids or other people, to do that? Not always. I think that everything should be perfect, and we should scaffold everything so that everybody can have like a teensy tiny mistake that they are then supposed to learn as if they had gone through World War II. So it doesn't really work that way. But um, I do think that those smaller failures and pushing ourselves out into discomfort is important, because then you do see where things are more fragile. So on a corporate level, always think of, and I'm forgetting what they called this, but Netflix used to have something where they would have people attack their system and like basically try to think of everything that could go wrong. It was called like Gorilla something, and I
Yeah.
thought, yeah, that's kind of what you end up doing in your own life, like pushing yourself just that much further, and not, but incrementally, so that you actually do see, that needs to be shorn up. Okay, we need to maybe put some processes in for that. Um, that I think is really important. So on a very individual basis, that is perpetually going out and trying that new thing, and the thinking in the new way and meeting the new person. And for me, like the people I speak to are like managing directors at giant hedge funds. Like and you would think, oh, I could do anything because, they're on top of the world. But actually to say, I think I might want to teach after I, finish this gig as a master of the universe. And it's really hard for them to, and I'm like, okay, so come in and talk to our board director program for half an hour or an hour on strategy and boards. And they'd be like, really? Okay. And they do it and they try it. And I feel like kudos to them, because they have a lot to lose. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to fail in front, but they get a lot of learning from the experience and the feedback.
One of your superpowers is really around storytelling, but not only as communication, but also as connection. So, why to you is storytelling so vital of a skill in the future of work? Because I think you mentioned that, and how can we apply that?
Um, yeah, I have over the years decided that there are 5 competencies that are great for the future of work, or maybe the now of work, and that is um, the ability to scan the horizon and kind of synthesize trends for the future and kind of have that orientation. Being purpose-led, which you talked about, storytelling, connection, the way that we connect with each other as humans, and collaborate, and then adaptable. So those are the 5. And storytelling is important because um, I think about Financial Times, and I'll talk about John Riding. He was the CEO of the Financial Times. He just um, did not retire. He retired as CEO, but he sort of migrated to chair and all these other things. I just attended his non-retirement party here in Hong Kong as he does his world tour, and I remember really being impressed. You could see um, when he became CEO, he hired me in Asia and then became global CEO, and you could see him thinking about his legacy. And he did something that it probably sounds corny, but when we had to do a digital transformation at Financial Times, I mean, the newspaper was everything. In 2006, like super late, I couldn't believe how non-digital it was. And he brought everybody kicking and screaming into the digital age. He introduced paywalls, but he had this little card that everybody got that talked about like the transformation that we were all going to be in together, and the story of like us getting, majority of our revenue from digital, and continuing our important mission to help people make better business decisions. And it was this story, right? And he did it. That is his legacy, one of many as a CEO. But I remember we did this transition, and then at some point, like a couple years later, we all got this new like goal, and it was 15% margin. And I was like, wow, that is crap. It's like not inspiring to me at all. There is no story. That's a number. And we were like, why are we doing that? It's like, we were kind of prepping to be sold. So like, but that wasn't talked about. It was just like, remember, it's 15%. And you're
That
like,
was it.
okay. And it really, really stuck with me that, like, we all want a quest. We all want our work to matter. And as in my deeply honorable role as manager, that was one of my key jobs, right? Is to think like, to even take that, like, oh, 15% and say, like, you know what? This is why it matters. This is why it matters on a like epic level, a deeper level. And this is why you matter to that big journey. And that's really, that to me as a leader in a company is always about like, this is what we need you to do. This is why it matters. This is why you matter. And I think that right now that's so important because that's kind of what's missing. As we transition to AI, people are asking, well, how do I matter in this? And, what are we actually trying to do? And a lot of the disconnect, I think, is this, it's going to be great, but for who? And, that the communication and the lack of the stories that we're telling or the clarity around the stories can be a problem.
So the people that aren't at the forefront of it, the people that are in the bottom, how are they going to bridge that gap, right? Because nobody's talking about the bridge. You're either here on this island of AI and the future, Web3, IoT, and all of these, various different things, quantum, or you're over here, right? And you're on the land of, I don't know, dinosaurs, so you're going to go extinct, but nobody's talking about where's Noah's Ark in this in this story, right? And
Oh,
so
I love that metaphor. Tiffany, that's so great. I was just watching my TED Talk about AI and it was absolutely that. It was two students primarily, and it was like everybody matters, and I don't care if you're like a flower, arranger as your greatest aspiration, like get on the boat. We need everybody on the boat. And I think that the story matters because the stories are pretty negative. And if we're sitting here on this podcast and somebody walks in and says, there's going to be a fire drill in 5 minutes, then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God. And that's where we are now. If somebody walks in my door and says, they're passing around $1 million checks, they're coming in 5 minutes, all of a sudden I'm like, what can I do? How do I get involved?
you're
Right?
invested in it.
So,
You're invested in it. Exactly. Why does it matter?
yeah.
The next thing is, I really loved your idea around this concept of 3 a.m., friends network. What, first of all, what is
Mm.
that? And what does that look like in your life?
So my first TED Talk, which was in 2016, was around the death of my friend. And she was, my college buddy, lived together after college. And then she went to Germany and got married. And I ended up in Hong Kong and got married. And she went through a tough time and committed suicide. And that was devastating for me, and it really did also make me think about how much time we spend investing in friendships, investing in resources. And so a 3 a.m. friend is the person that you can call at 3 a.m. and they come and get you, or they answer the phone or whatever it is. As a global citizen, sometimes I'll tell my, friends in the US, like, I can be your 3 a.m. friend because it's only 3 p.m. for me. Um, but truly, like the days, and we all, I think, end up having them where, you know, you walk out and you just are super upset, and your friend goes, "All right, where are you? I'm hopping in the car. I'm gonna pick you up. We're gonna go get a cup of tea or something stronger, and you know, I'll just listen." And so I live in a city where it's quite transient,
Mm.
especially in the expat population. So even thinking about, okay, my my friend who's been here 20 years just left. Um, I got to make sure I have people who are in in that group. And I think, especially now, I mean, the Surgeon General is warning about a loneliness epidemic, and globally and especially in the US, and we're perpetually on Instagram, on, TikTok, but you need to have people who are going to be there. And 3 a.m. friends is kind of catchy, so that caught on. But even in the Future Proof Lab, we have questions like, who is your 3 a.m. friend? And it might be different, but who are you going to celebrate with? Because, some of the saddest moments in your life could be the day you get a promotion and you have nobody to call to, that's like,
Mm.
yay, woohoo, we knew you could do it. And so I think that the relationships that we have are so important. And that has been a real bedrock of the book that I wrote in 2019, which kind of talked about AI, but not like it is now. And I think that investing in those human to human connections is even more important.
I can't agree with you more. As AI and other technologies take over a lot of, I think the manual labor and like some of these repetitive things that we're doing, that this concept around having these networks to continue on in life are going to be even more important, in person. And so those face-to-face interactions, I think, are going to become more important, more valuable. um, and that authenticity around it is um, going to be the thing that cannot be replaced, no matter how well you train your chat, AI to go ahead and soothe your ego and stuff like that. You need a girlfriend to tell you like, get your ass out of bed and let's go to the bar. Like, because your chat GPT is not going to go ahead and meet you there, right? She is, or he or whoever, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
earlier you talked really about this idea of experimentation, and I really want to know, why do you believe it's essential to, future proofing a career or even your life?
Well, because of change, really. So when we lean into and get really brittle around one way to do things, then we fail to see what's coming, and we're not ready for what's coming. And so, to a certain extent, the experimentation and reinvention is reevaluating like what you bring to the table. And one of the guys that did Future Proof, he said, "Oh, I get it. Like he's been the head of." He was in Asia as the head of the International Bank of Settlement. So like he and like Nicole Kidman were the two people who didn't have to quarantine in Hong Kong. And he's like, I'm trying to really think about like what does it mean when I don't have this big title and all of these, perks basically. Who am I? And after we talked about, and he went through one of the cohorts, he's like, it's really about value creation as opposed to your job title. It's about really, or your value proposition and all the things you've done. It's like little beads in a kaleidoscope. Like you turn and things change, and suddenly you have something new to offer because the context, the environment has changed. Maybe, the people you work with has changed. Maybe you are older and can give back as a grandparent, or, a kind of role as a grandparent if you don't have your own grandkids. There's so much in the world to do, um, that I think that opportunity to kind of stay engaged and reinvent. The world is just changing too much. It's the way that you can be aware of your surroundings and the change, because snow melts from the edges. If you're just sitting there in your little igloo, you could think everything's fine.
That is absolutely so true. And I really like that kaleidoscope. Like I saw that as a whole, visual. Um and yeah, I mean, I think that everybody has something to offer going forward. That kind of rolls into my next question, which is, we've talked about lifelong learning. But what does it actually really look like when you're mid-career or you're juggling real life, kids, family, aging parents, retirement, accident, injury, death, all of these things.
Yeah, it looks really small. I think, small, imperfect um, actions are the way that you go forward, because I have had all of that, right? A big career and three kids under five and aging parents that live in a different country. And I always think about, like, what is one thing that I can learn this year? And sometimes it's really small. Sometimes I'll commit to a course, but sometimes I'm going to have 5 conversations with people, that are doing something I'm curious about. So one year it was the metaverse, for whatever that was worth. Um, and it turned into actually a project, but it doesn't have to be big. And I would say, just approaching things, if you start going, oh my God, I have to do the lifelong learning thing. Oh my God, it's like, that's not going to be that productive either. But if you're like, I wonder what I could learn today. I mean, part of it is just walking around and noticing things um, in your surrounding, or having one conversation that gives you a different perspective. That's learning. I think having good conversations is, the nexus. It is the bridge to learning.
You've worked with leaders all over the world. How do you help them to really redefine their impact beyond that traditional success? I know you talked about that. The one guy was like, well, I've been successful. What does my legacy look like? How do you help them get there?
Well, one of the reasons I do cohorts is um, because I like the idea of having many different perspectives. And some of my individual coaching clients who are, particularly if they're high level and they're in their job and they don't want anybody to know that they're thinking about this, I do that. And oftentimes it's the questions, it's the creating space to have um, to dream a little bit, to imagine what that could look like, and having somebody to challenge you, like one of our one of my clients was saying, I have a great network. I have like the best network in the world, right? It's like CEO, big company. And I was like, that's really great. Way better than mine, I'm sure. I said, how many of those people know that what you want to do after you're a CEO? And there was this really long pause. And he was like, none. So, it's like, I find that it is creating the space for yourself. You don't have to come to me, but creating that space, and also have somebody who's just kind of prodding you to think bigger, even, or more laterally, or get out of the little bubble. However high level the bubble is, it still can be a bubble, and really think more broadly. And then also a little bit longer term. So one thing that helps people is to think, I always love this exercise from the Long Now Foundation, and a book called How to Be a Good Ancestor, which is, imagine that your grandchild or somebody in your line, if you know, somebody you in your bloodline or just in your kinship line, is turning 65, and they're having this big party, and it's time to do the toast, and they look over and they see a picture of you on the shelf, and suddenly they think about, what legacy did you leave them? You're long gone. What are the things that they're going to think about when they look at your picture? What did you teach them? What values did you leave? And that really, puts it so far ahead into the future that people start thinking on a more elemental level than, you know, I was was a certain person, or, and work is important too, all the people that you touch. But it just brings it much more to a human level.
So I think about all these people that you've led through thinking about that legacy and that picture on the wall, and I'm going to turn back that question to you and kind of ask, what's the legacy you're trying to build professionally and personally, and what would people you would hope that your kinship or your peers, children, grandchildren, would say about your picture on the wall?
Well, I had to laugh when you told me about your grandmother, because my daughter is always telling me about how much better she's going to raise her own children than I have raised her. So I don't know if she would agree with the metric, but I'm sure she'll do a great job, and I'll take all the credit. I'm hoping.
Absolutely. As a
I
grandmother, yes, you do get that. That's literally why it says grand in front of the name. That's the
Ah,
legacy right there.
but I do think that even for, my kids, I have asked them sometimes, because I've taken some turns, and a lot of it has been wanting to live life on my own terms, wanting to um, be, present as a parent, and also have fulfilling contributions professionally and in my community. And one of the things that my daughter said, and this is, I guess 5 years now, she said, I learned that sometimes you have to take a risk to go for what you really want. And I thought that was beautiful, and still do. And if that is something that I could leave to, the next generation, that they can take a leap, and it will be okay. And they can do it with joy and optimism. And then I would say, because it's been passed down to me, the importance of relationships, and always being somebody who will, you know, help other people out, both the people you know and the people you don't know. And that's always been an important thing in my family and in my husband's family, and that we pass on to our children. They can do whatever they want in life, but those things, kind of going for what they want, being able to risk a bit, and also being a good human being that can build solid relationships and be a positive part of society. Those are the things that are non-negotiables for me. The things I said are not particularly crazy, but I had somebody on my master classes, and she said people feel like there's precarity, there is status safeguarding, and if you have
Mm,
to do something that allows your children to sort of like maintain their status at the expense of somebody else, you will do that. And I
mm.
think that that's a conversation that I would want to have with my kids, to say, like, what are the benefits to society of that? Is that really what we want to do?
So many of our listeners are really navigating this change, especially because of the current situation with technology, geopolitical, and then just changes, right? As technology comes down. Um, if someone feels trapped in a current definition of success or resilience or, thoughts of legacy, that they really didn't choose or they haven't really thought about, what would you say to them?
Um, I have a couple of questions. There's a lot of people who have asked me, where do I start? And so I've designed all of these, exercises, like audits, and um, there are only a few questions, though. We have a future-proof checklist that's on our website. And it's 11 questions, and it is really like reflecting. Do you have an idea of what's possible for you in the future? Do you have new things you want to learn? Do you have relationships that you feel are supporting you? And how can you lean into that? Because those are the things, I guess, those are like the webs that allow you to change, that allow you to, go, okay, maybe all of the outer trappings will dissolve, but If you need a trophy to feel good about yourself, then that's a problem, right? What actually you need to feel good about yourself. You can still go for the trophy, but a lot of what we talk about is just having a network of people who um, can support you for who you are. And that allows you to become not only the great person you are now, but to consider other avenues and other ways that you can um, be.
I absolutely feel you. And, here at Confluently, we're always trying to ask those difficult questions and also preface that you may not like the answers. When you strip away all of those entitlements and trophies and, placards on your walls and everything else like that, who are you really? Um, Diana, thank you so much for showing up with such clarity and really honesty about this roller coaster called life. Your work is not really just about the future. It's really about us helping also think about how we can live better today.
It was such a lovely conversation. I spend, all my time talking about AI. It's nice to have a conversation about humans and relationships in the future. So thank you for spending time with me.
Absolutely. And I mean, AI is a big part of it. And but like you said, I think the important part that's going to go forward for humans is really those connections, right? And so that's why we're connecting here today. So with that, this has been Confluently. It's been great to have you here. Let me know what you really think about what is the future? What does success look like? And are you asking yourself that really important questions? Until next time, I'll see you there. Stay resilient, and I'm out.